The interview took place on primetime television, broadcasted to millions across the nation, with a well-known liberal TV host infamous for her aggressive questioning of conservative figures. Her reputation was built on orchestrating gotcha moments, trapping her guests in difficult, often misleading narratives designed to discredit their views. On this particular evening, she believed she had the perfect opportunity to humiliate Donald Trump by targeting his personal life, specifically his marriage to Melania. The host and her production team had spent weeks meticulously crafting questions meant to put Trump on the defensive, hoping to expose cracks in his image and challenge the values he publicly championed. Confident in her ability to steer the conversation, she maintained a polished, rehearsed demeanor, her signature smile barely concealing the intention behind her questions. From the moment the cameras started rolling, however, Trump sat calmly in his chair, exuding an air of control and confidence that hinted at his experience in handling adversarial media encounters. The host, believing she had full command of the situation, proceeded with her plan, unaware that the evening would take a dramatic turn. One that would not only dismantle her strategy, but also redefine the power dynamic between media and the political figures they sought to corner. With millions watching, the stakes were high, and while she anticipated an easy victory, what unfolded instead was a moment that would ultimately become one of the most memorable television interviews in recent history. Trump, having faced countless media attacks in the past, was fully prepared for the ambush, and rather than falling into the trap, he methodically dismantled the host's narrative, turning her own tactics against her. The host, accustomed to guests faltering under pressure, struggled to maintain her composure as she realized that her usual strategies were ineffective against someone who thrived in high-pressure situations. The air in the studio grew tense, as it became evident that the evening was not going as planned. The audience, initially expecting a calculated takedown of Trump, quickly recognized the shift in momentum. Instead of exposing Trump's weaknesses, the interview was about to highlight the flaws of modern media, its obsession with sensationalism, its disregard for substantive discussions, and its relentless attempts to undermine individuals who challenge its prevailing ideologies. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just an ordinary interview. It was a battle of principles, and Trump was about to take full control. The interview began with the host flashing a polished, practiced smile, a hallmark of her style when engaging with conservative guests. She had perfected the art of appearing cordial while setting up questions designed to subtly undermine her opponent. Tonight, she believed she had a particularly strong advantage: Trump's personal life, his marriage, and his views on success. As the cameras rolled, she started with a seemingly innocent question, one that appeared flattering on the surface but was laced with a hidden agenda. Mr. Trump, you've built an empire, become president, and influenced millions. Would you say you're just lucky? The question was posed with a controlled smile, her tone calculated to elicit a self-diminishing response, subtly pushing the narrative that Trump's achievements were not the result of hard work, but rather pure luck, privilege, or circumstance. It was a classic media tactic, starting soft before delivering a more cutting blow. But Trump had seen this play before, and he wasn't about to be led into a defensive position. He leaned forward slightly, his expression a mix of confidence and amusement. "You know, it's interesting you ask that," he responded, his voice steady and measured, already flipping the script on the host's intent. "Liberals love that word, lucky. They use it to diminish success, to suggest that hard work and sacrifice don't matter. But let me tell you something about luck. Luck doesn't build skyscrapers. Luck doesn't create thousands of jobs, and it certainly doesn't make America great." His tone sharpened slightly on the last sentence, and the shift in the room was palpable. The audience, initially neutral, began to sense that this interview might not unfold as expected. The host's eyes flickered with a brief hesitation, an almost imperceptible sign that Trump's response was not what she had been hoping for. She had expected him to either downplay his success modestly or defensively justify himself, but instead he had taken control, steering the conversation toward a larger critique of media narratives. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. She pressed on, tightening her smile just a fraction. "So? You're saying that everything you've achieved is purely through hard work?" she asked, her tone shifting ever so slightly, pushing him to appear as though he was disregarding external factors that may have contributed to his success. But Trump, anticipating her next move, doubled down. "I'm saying," he replied, his voice gaining intensity, "that success comes to those who earn it. Yes, I've been blessed. But I've also worked harder than most people can imagine. I've had nights where I didn't sleep, deals that seemed impossible, challenges that would have broken many others. But here's what really matters. I've never done it alone." The host's eyebrows raised slightly. There it was, the opening she thought she had been waiting for. She leaned in with an air of feigned curiosity, her tone dripping with intrigue. "Not alone?" she repeated, as if drawing him into a revelation. "Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the people behind Donald Trump." She believed she was steering the conversation back into familiar territory, hoping to shift the discussion toward his marriage and personal relationships, subtly insinuating that others, particularly his wife, had played a far greater role in his success than he was willing to admit. What she didn't realize was that she had just walked into a trap of her own making. Trump, sensing the shift, allowed a small smile to form. "Of course," he said smoothly. "When you mention the people behind me, you're probably thinking of my business partners, my advisors. But let me tell you who really deserves the credit. My family, particularly Melania." The air in the studio grew heavier as Trump deliberately directed the conversation away from business and onto the one subject the host had prepared to use against him. She had anticipated Trump brushing off the topic or giving a generic, obligatory acknowledgement, but instead he was leaning into it, taking control before she could launch her intended angle. She took a breath, ready to pounce. "Ah, yes, Melania," she said with a knowing look. "You know, many people wonder about her role in all of this. Some say she's rather quiet for such a powerful man's wife." Trump's expression didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, a flicker of recognition that this was the moment the real game was about to begin. He sat up slightly, his demeanor unwavering, exuding both authority and protectiveness. "Quiet? No. Dignified? Yes. There's a big difference, though I understand why some in the media might not grasp that concept." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the audience, signaling that Trump's response had landed with effect. The host's smile faltered just slightly. Her strategy was unraveling faster than she had anticipated. She had assumed Trump would dodge or soften the subject, but instead, he had met it head-on, setting the stage for what would soon become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. The host sensed an opportunity as Trump mentioned his family, particularly Melania, and she wasted no time in trying to steer the conversation toward a line of questioning that she believed would expose a supposed weakness. She maintained her polished smile but added a slight tilt of her head, a practiced move designed to appear thoughtful yet subtly condescending. "Ah, yes, Melania," she said, her voice laced with artificial curiosity. "You know, many people wonder about her role in all of this. Some say she's rather quiet for such a powerful man's wife." The implication was clear. Melania was merely a silent figure standing in Trump's shadow, a trophy wife with no real influence or contributions of her own. The audience, as well as the host, expected Trump to either dismiss the question with a lighthearted remark or attempt a standard defense, but instead his expression shifted ever so slightly. There was a moment of pause, not one of hesitation, but one of calculation, as if he were choosing his words with precision. Then, in a measured yet firm tone, he responded, "Quiet? No. Dignified? Yes. There's a big difference, though I understand why some in the media might not grasp that concept." His words carried weight, and a ripple of quiet murmurs spread through the audience. The host blinked, momentarily thrown off by the directness of his response, but she quickly regained her composure. She adjusted her posture, feigning genuine interest, and pushed further. "Well, what I mean is, we rarely hear from her. Unlike other political wives who are very visible, don't you think the public deserves to know more about the woman behind Donald Trump?" It was a calculated question, one meant to frame Melania as an enigmatic, possibly submissive figure who lacked the influence or agency of other first ladies. But Trump wasn't going to let that narrative take hold. His voice, now carrying an unmistakable note of pride and protectiveness, delivered his counter. "The public," he said, his eyes locking onto the host with unwavering confidence, knows exactly what they need to know about Melania. She's brilliant, accomplished, and chooses her moments carefully, unlike some who feel the need to fill every silence with noise. The subtle jab was unmistakable, and a few chuckles escaped from the audience. The host's polished smile tightened just slightly, but she pressed on, sensing she had to regain control before Trump completely dictated the conversation. With a tone shifting from faux curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism, she leaned forward slightly. "Let's talk about those accomplishments then," she said, attempting to put Trump on the defensive. Because some people say, well, they wonder. If her main achievement isn't simply being Mrs. Donald Trump, the words hung in the air for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, deliberately phrased to imply that Melania had done nothing of real significance beyond marrying a wealthy and powerful man. The tension in the room grew, and even the cameraman exchanged subtle glances, recognizing that the interview had just reached a turning point. Trump's expression hardened, his demeanor shifting from controlled amusement to absolute seriousness. The audience, sensing an incoming rebuttal, leaned forward. "Let me be very clear about something," Trump said, his voice now firm, cutting through the manufactured narrative with precision. "Since you want to talk about achievements, let's talk facts. Melania speaks 5 languages fluently. She's built her own successful career. She's represented our country with more grace and dignity than any first lady in recent memory. But you wouldn't know about that, would you? Because the mainstream media is too busy pushing their own narrative instead of telling the truth." A few audible murmurs of approval rippled through the audience, and the host's confidence wavered for just a moment. This was not how this exchange was supposed to go. She had envisioned Trump scrambling to justify his wife's role, but instead, he was now on the offensive, highlighting how the media's failure to report on Melania's accomplishments was part of a broader issue, an unwillingness to acknowledge anything that did not fit their preferred portrayal of powerful conservative figures. The host, sensing her previous tactic had backfired, tried to pivot. She adopted a more analytical tone, as though she were merely an observer of public perception rather than an active participant in shaping it. "Of course, Mr. Trump," she said, "but don't you think that being married to you has opened certain doors for her?" The attempt to downplay Melania's success was clear. She was implying that anything Melania had achieved was solely due to her association with Trump rather than her own merit. But Trump was ready. He let out a short chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "You know what's interesting about that question?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Shows exactly what's wrong with how some people think. Success isn't about doors being opened, it's about what you do once you're in the room. And Melania, she doesn't just walk through doors, she transforms every room she enters." The audience, which had been relatively quiet up until this point, broke into scattered applause, signaling that Trump's words had landed powerfully. The host, now visibly aware that she was losing control of the narrative, maintained her composed expression but was running out of ways to spin the conversation in her favor. She had set out to diminish Melania's role, but instead Trump had elevated it in a way that made the audience see beyond the media's portrayal. The host's next move would be critical, but the power dynamic had already shifted, and what she had once believed would be an easy interview was quickly becoming a defining moment for all the wrong reasons. The host, realizing that her previous attempts to diminish Melania's role had failed, decided to take a more direct and aggressive approach. She knew she needed a sharp pivot, a question so bold and provocative that it would force Trump onto the defensive. She took a calculated pause, allowing the tension in the room to build before delivering her next line. With a slight smirk, she leaned forward and, dropping all pretense of subtlety, asked, "Mr. Trump, you're a powerful, wealthy man. You could have any woman you want. Yet, you stay with someone who's aging alongside you. Don't you ever think about trading up?" The words hung in the air like a bomb just detonated. The studio fell into an eerie silence as the impact of the question registered not only with Trump, but with everyone in the room. Several audience members audibly gasped, shocked not only by the bluntness of the question, but by the sheer disrespect it carried. The cameraman exchanged stunned glances, and even the producer, who had likely encouraged the aggressive line of questioning, appeared frozen in disbelief. This was no longer just an interview, It had turned into an outright attack on Trump's marriage and, by extension, the values of loyalty, commitment, and respect. For the first time since the interview began, Trump didn't immediately respond. He sat still, his expression unreadable, his fingers interlocked in front of him as if contemplating the weight of the words just spoken. The host, mistaking his silence for hesitation, allowed a small, victorious smile to creep onto her face, believing she had finally landed the fatal blow that would put Trump in an uncomfortable, unwinnable position. But then, after a long pause, Trump spoke, his voice lower and more deliberate than before. "Trading up?" he repeated, his tone eerily calm. "Let me tell you something about value, since that seems to be all you understand." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto the host, his presence dominating the room. "In business, yes, sometimes you trade up. You find a better deal, a newer model, a shinier option. But we're not talking about real estate or cars here. We're talking about my wife, my partner, the mother of my son." The weight of his words pressed down on the room like a storm, and the energy shifted entirely. The host, who had moments ago been riding high on what she believed was a game-changing moment, now seemed visibly uncomfortable. Trump was no longer just answering a question, he was delivering a lesson, one that was resonating far beyond the walls of the studio. He continued, his voice unwavering. "Let me tell you what real value is. Real value is someone who stands by you when the cameras are off. Real value is someone who tells you the truth when everyone else is telling you what you want to hear. Real value is loyalty, integrity, and character. Something that clearly isn't taught in journalism school anymore." His words cut through the host's carefully constructed facade, and for the first time she looked uncertain, as if she had just realized that her attempt to humiliate Trump had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly. The audience, which had been holding its breath, suddenly erupted into a wave of murmurs, some even clapping in agreement. The host, sensing that she was losing control, attempted to interject, stammering slightly as she tried to regain her composure. I didn't mean to suggest," she began, but Trump immediately cut her off, his voice rising just slightly in intensity. "Oh, but you did. You meant exactly what you said. And that's the problem with the media today. You make these implications, and when you're called out on them, you try to backtrack. But let me be very clear. What you just asked is not only insulting to Melania, it's insulting to every woman who has ever stood by her husband through thick and thin, to every couple who has built a life together based on real love and not just appearances." By now, the host's confidence had completely crumbled. She glanced toward her producer, who was frantically signaling for a commercial break, but the damage had already been done. What was meant to be a moment of humiliation for Trump had instead turned into a masterclass in loyalty, respect, and the true meaning of commitment. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly, and the host now found herself in a losing battle with no way out. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. What was supposed to be an ambush had turned into a spectacle of the host's own making, and she was visibly struggling to regain control. The audience, initially expecting a calculated takedown of Trump, now found themselves witnessing a reversal so complete that the host's initial confidence had all but disappeared. Trump had seized the moment, turning her own words against her, exposing the shallow, transactional view of relationships that the media often pushed. But he wasn't finished yet. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxed yet commanding, and let the silence stretch just long enough to ensure that every person in the room and every viewer at home felt the weight of what had just transpired. Then, with a deliberate, knowing smile, he pressed forward. "You see, this is exactly what's wrong with how people like you and the media in general view relationships," Trump said, his voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. "You think everything is disposable. You think that a marriage, a lifelong commitment, is just another business deal, something to be upgraded when a better option comes along. That's why people don't trust the media anymore, because instead of reporting real stories, instead of talking about real values, you sit here trying to push this nonsense, this idea that loyalty, that standing by someone is outdated." He gestured subtly toward the cameras, making it clear that his words were aimed not just at the host, but at the entire industry she represented. You think success is about wealth, about status, about trading up, but let me tell you something. It's not about what you can get, it's about what you build. And that's what people at home understand, even if you don't. The audience murmured in agreement, and the host, sensing she was losing ground fast, tried to pivot. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice a little tighter now, her smile more strained, we're simply having a conversation about the realities of life in the public eye. Surely even you can acknowledge that power and influence shape how people see relationships. But Trump was unfazed. In fact, he seemed almost amused at the host's attempt to reframe the discussion. Ah, so now it's about perception, he said, shaking his head. Let me tell you something about perception. The only people who see my marriage through the lens you just described are people like you. People who don't understand real value, real commitment. You think power changes the nature of a relationship? No, power reveals it. His voice grew more intense as he continued. It shows you who stands with you when times are tough. It shows you who's there because they believe in you, not because they can get something from you. And that's why I stay with Melania, because she's real. Because when everything else fades away, when the cameras turn off, when the world moves on to the next big headline, she's still there. The host opened her mouth to interject, but Trump wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, his tone now carrying an almost personal intensity. You want to talk about influence? About perception? Fine, let's talk about it. The real reason you're asking these questions, the real reason you're sitting here trying to frame this conversation the way you are, is because the media can't stand the idea of a strong conservative woman. You celebrate so-called independent women all the time, so long as they fit your narrative. But the moment a woman chooses dignity over drama, the moment she decides to support her husband instead of seeking attention, you call her weak, silent, trapped. That's the real double standard here, isn't it? The audience responded with scattered applause, and the host's expression hardened ever so slightly. She was running out of ways to redirect the conversation, but she made one last attempt. Mr. Trump, she said, trying to keep her voice measured, you must admit that your position, your wealth, your influence, it all affects how people see Melania. Surely it would be naive to think otherwise. Trump chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You know what's interesting about that question, he said, tilting his head slightly? It says more about you than it does about me or Melania, because you assume that success, that wealth, that power, these things define a person, but they don't. They reveal a person's true character. And what Melania has revealed through every challenge, every attack, every unfair criticism is exactly why I'm proud to have her by my side. By now, the host's confidence had nearly evaporated. She had thought she was crafting a moment that would go viral for all the right reasons, her reasons. But instead, she had created a platform for Trump to expose the very bias she had hoped to exploit. The audience could see it, the cameras could see it, and most importantly, everyone watching at home could see it. The conversation had shifted not because of clever debating tactics, but because Trump had tapped into something far deeper than politics. He had tapped into values. The values of loyalty, of commitment, of standing by the people who stand by you. And in doing so, he had turned what was supposed to be a media hit job into a defining moment of his own. The studio was silent except for the faint hum of cameras recording what had now become an interview unlike any other. The host, who had walked into this moment believing she would corner Trump with her carefully orchestrated narrative, now sat visibly shaken, her confident demeanor reduced to an awkward stiffness as she struggled to regain control. But there was no control left to reclaim. Trump had flipped the script entirely, and now, with the final moments of the interview approaching, he was about to deliver the decisive blow that would make this conversation one of the most talked-about moments in television history. He sat back for a moment, letting the weight of his previous words linger before leaning forward once more, his voice now carrying not just the tone of a man defending his marriage, but of a man speaking to the millions of people watching at home. You see, Trump began, his gaze unwavering, this isn't just about me or Melania. It's about you. about what you represent, about the message you and your network push every single day. You came here tonight thinking you were going to humiliate me, that you were going to paint my marriage as some kind of shallow arrangement, as if loyalty, as if commitment are things to be mocked. But instead, what you've really done is expose yourself. His hand gestured subtly toward the cameras, as if addressing not just the host, but the media establishment itself. You've shown every person watching exactly why people don't trust the media anymore. Because instead of talking about the real issues, instead of asking real questions, you chase controversy, you create drama, you push this narrative that relationships, that marriages are transactional, that success means replacing the people who stood by you with something shinier, something newer. And let me tell you something, that's not how real life works. The host sat frozen, unable to interject as Trump continued. You sit here and ask me if I've ever thought about trading up as if a marriage is nothing more than a business deal. But you know why that question bothers people? Why it struck a nerve with every single person watching at home? Because it's not just insulting to Melania. It's insulting to every couple who's been married for 20, 30, 40 years or more. It's insulting to every husband and wife who've stood by each other through thick and thin, through struggles and victories, through the ups and downs that come with life. Because real relationships aren't about what's convenient. They aren't about appearances. They're about standing together no matter what. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, some nodding in agreement, others clapping softly. The host, who had once held complete authority in this studio, now looked like she was searching for an escape. But there was none. Trump wasn't finished. And that's the problem with your kind of journalism, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You don't report the truth. You manufacture stories. You create controversy where there is none. You sit there pretending to have meaningful conversations when in reality all you want is a viral moment. Well, congratulations, you just got one, but it's not the moment you wanted. The audience erupted into applause, and the host producer, who had been frantically signaling for a commercial break, finally managed to cut away, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Within hours, clips of the interview would flood social media, sparking a firestorm of debate. And while the host had started the night believing she was about to deliver a career-defining takedown, it was Trump who had walked away victorious, having not only defended his marriage, but also exposed everything that was wrong with modern media in one masterful, unshakable response. The interview between Donald Trump and the TV host was more than just a televised confrontation. It carried profound lessons about life, relationships, and values. Most importantly, it emphasized the significance of loyalty and commitment in marriage, something that older generations deeply understand and cherish. In a society that increasingly prioritizes superficial appearances and replaceable commodities, Trump's message served as a reminder that true happiness does not come from fleeting luxuries but from enduring relationships built on trust, sacrifice, and honesty. Furthermore, this incident highlighted the imbalanced nature of modern media and its treatment of traditional values. Today's media often prioritizes sensationalism, controversy, and shock value over meaningful discussions on integrity, family, and long-term commitments. This serves as a wake-up call, particularly for older generations, to remain discerning and not allow biased narratives to undermine the values they have upheld throughout their lives. It is crucial to recognize that while the media may try to redefine norms, the wisdom and experience of those who have lived through decades of change remain invaluable in preserving what truly matters. Finally, perhaps the greatest lesson from this exchange is about resilience and standing firm in the face of adversity. In life, everyone will face moments of misunderstanding, challenges, or attacks. But how we respond defines our character. When we remain steadfast in our beliefs, protect what we hold dear, and refuse to be swayed by external pressures, we demonstrate real strength. This is not just a lesson for public figures or politicians. It is something that every senior individual can apply and pass down to younger generations. The true value of a person is not measured by fame or wealth, but by genuine relationships, integrity, and unwavering commitment to doing what is right.